If you're coming here from episode 1, you may already be noticing something. Now that you've heard the words wounded system instead of flawed personality, you might be more aware of how much you take in from the world around you, other people's moods, the emotional tone of the room, the unspoken tension in a conversation. We sense it, we feel it, partly because we feel so uncomfortable when there's tension. And often we try to avoid certain things. Conflict. For me, I couldn't go into a shelter for animals because I feel so much for the animals, and I couldn't imagine the dogs sitting in those cages waiting for someone to pick them. I also don't watch certain movies if they're loaded with big emotions. Believe it or not, I haven't watched Titanic and The Notebook. Oh my God. I know. You're probably thinking, this woman's unreal. So we all have ways of protecting ourselves when we have high levels of empathy. The pain can be too much when we think about harm coming to others. What do you do to protect yourself? You might be wondering whether this means you're intuitive, dysregulated, empathic, or somehow all three at once. Today's episode is about carefully and accurately untangling that confusion, because emotional absorption is not a character trait. It is a nervous system pattern, and patterns can be changed without erasing who you are. Many empaths describe emotional contagion as feeling like they're carrying emotions that don't belong to them. You walk into a room feeling neutral and leave feeling heavy. You talk to someone who's anxious and suddenly your chest is tight. You spend time with someone who's angry or withdrawn, and afterwards you feel unsettled without knowing why. This isn't imaginary, and it isn't weakness. Research on emotional contagion shows that humans naturally mirror and internalize other people's emotional states through facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, and nervous system cues. Empaths tend to be more sensitive to these signs, but after relational trauma, especially in narcissistic abuse, this sensitivity becomes amplified by hyper-vigilance. Your system isn't just noticing emotion, it's scanning for threats. After prolonged emotional manipulation, your nervous system learns that safety depends on early detection. You're the detector. If you can sense the shift quickly enough, maybe you can prevent the harm. Maybe you can adjust, you can soothe, explain, or de-escalate. Over time, your body stops distinguishing between information and responsibility. You don't just perceive emotion, you feel tasked with managing it, resolving it, fixing it. This is why emotional contagion feels exhausting rather than informative. In healthy attunement, you can notice someone else's emotional state without losing your own. In trauma-amplified empathy, your system collapses that boundary, and the other person's internal world floods yours. So our powers for good are being weaponized against us, and we are kicked into overdrive to now attempt to calm the environment down by trying to manage the other person, often the narcissist. And, well, we know how that goes, don't we? Our attempts to manage the situation often led to exactly the opposite of what we were intending. We try to appease and give in, but some narcissists just keep going. I've had clients tell me that their partners either go into punishment mode of the silent treatment, or I've had clients tell me that when she apologized, the raging lecture and verbal abuse lasted for hours of him stomping around the house. Her attempts to soothe him actually led to escalation. This is where it's important to return to something we named in episode 1. Sensitivity versus hypervigilance. Sensitivity allows connection. Hypervigilance is protective. From a nervous system perspective, hypervigilance is a state of sympathetic activation. meaning your body is preparing for potential danger even if none is immediately present. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. In this state, the brain prioritizes scanning over discernment. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels personal. Emotional signals that might otherwise pass through you get absorbed and held because your system doesn't yet trust that it's safe to let them go. One of the most common misunderstandings empaths have is believing that regulation means becoming less perceptive. It doesn't. Regulation means restoring choice. When your nervous system is regulated, you can still sense what's happening emotionally around you, but you're not hijacked by it. You can register information without your body reacting as if it's responsible for fixing, containing, or carrying what you perceive. This distinction matters because the goal of healing is not emotional numbness. It's emotional sovereignty or freedom. Let's talk about how emotional absorption actually happens in the body. Neuroscience research shows that humans use interoception, the ability to sense internal bodily states, to interpret emotion. When you perceive someone else's emotional cues, your brain predicts what the emotion would feel like in your own body. For empaths, especially those with trauma histories, this prediction becomes intense and immediate. Sort of like my example of going into a dog shelter. I would almost physically feel the sadness of the dogs waiting to be adopted. Hence, I avoid it. Your body doesn't just stimulate the feelings, it adopts it, it feels it. This is why emotional contagion feels physical. Tightness, heaviness, nausea, fatigue, pressure in the chest or throat. For me, I tear up. These sensations aren't random. They're the body's language. I know from a few of my clients that they aren't able to access their own connection with their body because their hyper-vigilance is so alert and scanning that they can't focus on themselves. They're focusing on other people's emotions. They become the container. I know I wasn't in touch with my body. I knew when I felt shame, guilt, fear, but not other calmer experiences like joy, trust, and calm. Ask yourself, what are the predominant feelings that you experience? Then I want you to ask yourself, are they your feelings and your emotions, or are they someone else's? The first step in changing this pattern is not pushing the sensation away. Not sure if I could anyways. That would mean we would push away all connection. And empaths definitely want connection. That's the fear of abandonment deeply rooted inside of us. So that goes back to the critical voice that said, "Why didn't you leave earlier?" Or, "Why don't you leave?" Because we don't want to be abandoned. And we don't want to abandon them because we attribute so much empathy to the narcissist's experience. Like they were abused as a child. They were left by their last partner. And I don't want to do that to them. I'll be the one that loves them no matter what. That level of empathy is overwhelmingly dangerous for you when you are with someone abusive, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So changing the pattern is orienting to it with some sense of clarity. I always say, if you can actually see it, feel it, or know it, you can actually do something with it. One of the simplest and most effective practices is what researchers call affect labeling, which means naming internal states without judgment. When you notice a shift, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" try naming what's happening. There's this heaviness in my chest, or my stomach is not feeling right. This activates parts of the brain associated with regulation rather than reactivity. You're not analyzing or fixing. You're just acknowledging, you're sitting with it, you're labeling, you're identifying it. That alone can reduce some of the intensity. An example of this is if you're sick, you go to the doctor because you want a name for it. What is it that I'm struggling with? We want to know if it's the flu, strep throat, or a broken bone in your leg. Why is it important for us to know that? Because if we know it and can label it, then we can find the cure. In medical terms, I mean. So if we can acknowledge, I'm feeling anxious, and this is where I'm feeling it, our body and our brain can get into some kind of alignment. And our brain says, at least now I know what it is. Then I can go to the next step of trying to figure out what I do about it. If we don't know what's happening because we're so out of touch with our bodies, we can't actually change it. We can't change that part of the pattern. The next step is differentiation, which is the skill of separating what is yours from what is not. This can feel difficult for empaths because many of us were trained consciously and unconsciously to override differentiation in favor of connection. A helpful question here is the one that we introduced in episode 1 and that we'll continue to use throughout the season. Is this mine? This is not a philosophical question. It's a somatic one. When you ask it, notice what happens in your body. More often than not, emotions that belong to someone else will feel diffuse, they'll feel heavy or draining, while emotions that are yours tend to feel more specific and grounded, like you're more in touch with it, even if they're uncomfortable. With practice, this distinction becomes clearer. Next, grounding before and after interactions is another evidence-supported way to reduce emotional absorption. Grounding works by sending signals of safety to your nervous system, which lowers the need for hyper-vigilance scanning. Before entering a situation that tends to overwhelm you, try a brief orienting practice. Look around, name 5 things that you see. Feel your feet making contact with the ground. Lengthen your exhale slightly. These cues tell your body that you are here, now, and ready. After the interaction, do something that involves sensory input or movement, such as stretching, walking, washing your hands in warm water. This helps your system discharge some of the residual emotion activation instead of carrying it forward. Does that sound too simple? Are you skeptical? I get it. We are still so focused on the emotional charged interaction, and we want to fix it, don't we? We ruminate and think of how we could have handled the conversation differently, better, said something, not said something, the spiral. But here's the thing. Our body will react to a different input. That's how empathy has brought these experiences to you. And this is how we start with simple practices to release some of the feelings and the experiences. It's like taking your winter coat off in the summer. Shed some of it. We don't have to carry it all. Nothing bad will happen. You've done nothing wrong. You don't need to feel guilty if you don't carry somebody else's emotions. To ground ourselves is to signal to the brain. To ground ourselves is a signal to the brain. I know we can't see it or touch the solution, but our brain and our body get it. They will allow the input of grounding. We often take that away by continuing to think about it. Sometimes it's, let me send an email explaining myself further to ensure the connection, or call the person and apologize. But just pause. Pause and stabilize. One common fear empaths have is that if they stop absorbing emotion, they'll become selfish or disconnected. The fear makes sense, especially if empathy was tied to safety and or worth in the past relationships. But regulated empathy actually allows deeper connection, not less. When you're not flooded by fear, shame, guilt, and doubt, you can respond intentionally instead of reactively. You can allow your own feelings to join with somebody else's if they're sad because something happened. Instead of you taking it on, you can sit with them, console them, ask if they need something. You can't do that if you're right down there with them. You can offer compassion without abandoning yourself. This is the groundwork for what we'll focus on in episode 3. Compassion is not responsibility, where we talk about caring without carrying and allowing others to have their own emotional experiences. It's important to name that absorbing other people's emotions is not just about other people. Many empaths absorb environmental stress, media, and collective emotional states. News cycles, social media, crowded spaces, and even certain types of work environments can overload a sensitive nervous system. That's why I can't watch certain movies on TV. I don't watch the news. The news is all negative, with maybe a few pieces of fluff at the end. And I just can't manage it. I think that this is often labeled incorrectly as anxiety. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to avoid the world. It means you need rhythms of recovery. If you scratch yourself, you have to put a Band-Aid on it. Research on nervous system regulation consistently shows that recovery isn't passive. It's intentional. Short, regular moments of regulation are more effective than occasional long breaks. Think of this as maintenance, not retreat. As you work with these practices, you may notice guilt arise. You may feel like you're pulling away, becoming distant, or failing to be supportive. As givers, it feels like if we aren't giving, we are somehow depleted. We feel lost and disconnected. This guilt is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a conditioned response. In episode 8, Boundaries Without Guilt, we'll talk about why guilt shows up when you protect yourself and how to stay regulated when it does. For now, it's enough to notice the guilt without obeying it or reacting to it. It's not uncommon that this is the conditional response that we want to run from, so we can often give in to it and say sorry or take responsibility for something we didn't do. Our reactions are to minimize and run away from guilt, so we often give in. Regulation is not rejection. Protection is not punishment. And self-protection is not wrong, but it's often mislabeled as being selfish. It's not. We have to find alternate ways of coping because the learned safety from childhood may no longer apply. The need to connect is still the same, but we have to find adult ways of connecting so that we aren't giving up our soul to others. Because yes, you do deserve to be cared for and given to. It means that we have to be discerning in who we allow in that will also give to us. And as an aside, we also have to learn to receive, but that's another episode. If emotional absorption has been a lifelong pattern for you, change may feel subtle at first. You might simply notice that you recover faster, or that someone else's mood doesn't linger as long in your body. These are signs of healing, even if the pattern hasn't disappeared completely. Our nervous system learns through repetition, not force. Each time you orient, name, differentiate, and ground, you're teaching your body a new rule. I can be connected without being consumed. All right, as we close today, I want to remind you of something essential. Your empathy did not cause exhaustion. The lack of protection did. Emotional contagion isn't proof that you're too open. It's evidence that your system adapted to survive. Now, we're teaching it something new. In the next episode, Compassion is Not Responsibility, we'll take this work a step further and explore how empathy becomes obligation and why that pattern forms, and how to untangle care from self-sacrifice without shutting down your own heart. You don't need to rush. You're not late. You're learning how to stay with yourself while staying connected, and that is a profound shift. Thank you for being here, and I'll meet you in the next episode. Be well.